was listening to your podcast, Jordan Peterson, and he was kind of rationalizing the existence of hierarchies. But when I look at actually who forms the apex of the hierarchy in our society, it's largely traumatized people. For example, if you believe you live in a horrible world, how are you going to be? You have to be aggressive, grandiose, paranoid, selfish. In other words, you'll be the president of the United States because he's the one who said in so many words that the world is a horrible place. And that's the world he lives in. The Buddha said 2,500 years ago that with our minds we create the world.
Yeah.
But my contention is that with our minds we create the world creates our minds. And Trump's brain was formed in a family where he was demeaned and punished and attacked and humiliated by his father. And so he believes he lives in a horrible world. That's what he acts out. And his brother dragged himself to death. So it's these traumatized people. Now his opponent, I could go into that, was also traumatized.
But what, so you're saying that in Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, there were two traumatized people
the American
fighting to govern a traumatized world?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And Hillary's trauma showed up in when she had pneumonia, she wouldn't even acknowledge it. Because as a child, she'd been taught she had to suck up her pain, she mustn't be vulnerable. She puts up with the philanderings of her husband, who's as much of a exploiter of women as Donald Trump ever was, just not as egregious about it. And she still justifies it. And so her method is to become inauthentic and to suck it all up, and that's her form of trauma. I could talk about British politics.
Go on.
I could talk about...
Might as well do everyone now. You're on a roll.
I could talk about this repressed person who is so in denial of her own trauma that she's willing to traumatize the most vulnerable people in society. Her name is Margaret Thatcher.
What was her trauma, do you think? It's
sorry?
good, this. I'm enjoying this. So you sort of a bit like in The Matrix when Neo sees everything's made out of numbers. You look at people and you see all their trauma and damage.
That's what I see. That's what I see. I saw in her a tremendously repressed person. Then you have a bland-faced schoolboy who's willing to murder hundreds of thousands of people and never take any responsibility for it. And still doesn't deal with the impact of it. His name is Tony Blair, who's quite willing to go to drop bombs on Arabs far away, and all do it in the service of lies that a school child could see through. And these are traumatized people. Otherwise, they couldn't do it. They wouldn't be that split. And these are the people that our society rewards with power. Well, that's a sign of a traumatized society. That's my next book.
Yes, good that. That's going to be a smasher, that one. I'm banging to that already.
I got to write it first.
You've done the hard work. You've come up with a concept. The rest writes itself. Now, what about, can we carry on with this game of mugging off the powerful? Because I'm loving this. So, look, can we say like Barack Obama? Like, you know, that there is a continuum.
Obama is a fascinating case.
Go on.
People talk about Trump is destroying Obama's legacy. I don't think so. Trump is Obama's legacy.
Yes.
I read his biography. I'm implying that he's a person that's very chameleon-like. He can not deliberately and not even necessarily consciously or manipulatively identify with whoever. But I think his biggest sin was to have enrolled a lot of people in the possibility of transformation and change without delivering any of it.
Furthermore, do you think that the inability of these individuals to manifest real change is a demonstration that what we have are deeply entrenched and traumatized systems that are predicated on unconscious choices, unconscious drives, and that the system will not alter itself from within itself, but will sustain itself? And it's only sort of new, radical ideas that can alter it.
Well, any system is designed in such a way as to make change impossible. That's just the nature of any organization, any system. So that doesn't matter what individual. So even if Obama came along fully committed to his agenda, which I believe on some level he was sincere about, there would have been a million reasons why the system and how the system would have prevented him from carrying out his agenda. But let me ask you something, or assert something. Obama got into power funded heavily by Wall Street. Now, is Wall Street stupid, or do they know which side their bread is buttered on? They knew what they were getting. They didn't buy into the hope we change kind of thing. They knew exactly what a facile and efficient servant of the status quo he would be. And no sooner does he get into power than he bails out Wall Street.
Yes.
He was responsible for one of the greatest transfers of wealth upwards in history, and so the system knew what they were getting. It's just that the rest of us, because we wanted to believe in the positive side of his persona, we got sucked in. The system never got sucked in by him.
Why this bewildered clinging to these narratives that have clearly been exposed as erroneous? Why now, post-Trump, why are we seeing from the liberal establishment a sort of a nostalgia for something that was basically about 15 minutes ago, rather than an acknowledgement and a recognition of the need for meaningful, significant change that addresses the problems of essentially the poor?
Well, when you look at say, American politics or economics, Obama was as ready as anybody to kill people abroad. He was as ready as anybody to send troops overseas. It's no different than American history has always been. He was smoother about it. He was more urbane about it. He was more articulate about it. He also knew how to speak to people's better sides. Along comes a Trump, and he's egregious. He's a highly traumatized, utterly self-unrestrained, troubled schoolyard bully. And so it's offensive to the sensitivity, the sensibilities of the liberal establishment to have somebody like Trump represent them. When it comes to genuine policy, there's no difference between these people. It's just that the system wants people who can make it more palatable, and Trump makes it very unpalatable.
Yes.
And so Trump has woken us up. But unfortunately, a lot of the liberal outrage has been at Trump personally, rather than at the policies, yes, and rather than at the system that he represents. No worse or no better. In fact, he represents it more worse than, even a Bush or a Clinton or an Obama certainly can be much more effective in representing the system than Trump is. And that's what Trump's sin is. Trump's sin is not in what he does. Trump's sin is in his personal egregious, in-your-face dysfunction.
Is it that Trump is not an anomaly? Trump is revelation. Trump reveals.
That's exactly what Trump does, and that's why they can't forgive him.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how personally I see it.
I think.
And by the way, I'm speaking of all of them as traumatized people. And when Obama was abandoned by his father, and he idealized his father in his book.
Yeah, songs, yeah. My father.
Yeah, or I forget what the title of it was.
It's something quite sentimental, like songs, my father.
But he was a traumatized person, and then his mother was a highly troubled individual, and he was brought up by his white grandparents. This guy suffered, but he lacquered his suffering with this patina of rationality.
What you're saying is a kind of heresy of the sort of dominant worldview, while we are sort of experiencing a kind of apparent rise of what used to be regarded as right-wing thinking in terms of nationalism, persecution of religious groups, for example. I feel, and I've heard Slavoj Žižek speak to this also, that the failing is of the left in its abandonment of conventional indigenous working class people, regardless of colour, race or religion. That the liberal project abandoned working class people in favour of shallow identity politics. I'm not saying that identity politics are shallow in themselves. I'm saying that they were shallow in their intentions, that we weren't seeing transgender media figures saying we've got to do something about transgender. We were seeing people using these devices to persecute, malign and alienate working class people and vilify them.
Well, the transfer of wealth, or I should say the accelerated transfer of wealth and power to the top 1% or less, began not under Trump. It began long before Trump, and it was continued under Trump, but he didn't initiate it. The suppression of indigenous people in my own home country of Canada where indigenous people make up 30% of the jail population, they make up 5% of the general population. And the high degrees of addiction and suicide and mental illness and ADHD and all these other problems in the indigenous population is horrendous in Canada. That didn't begin with any particular conservative politician. It's been a historical fact. And so the whole system has been based all along. I mean, when you go to Trafalgar Square, you see all these statues of mass murderers, people who quite happily shot down tens of thousands of Indians in India, or who oppressed and massacred natives in in North America and elsewhere. And these are our heroes. And so this society has been for hundreds of years based on the extirpation or the suppression of indigenous people and working people. There was an article in The Guardian last week, I think, or was it this week, where they talk about how the Peterloo Massacre was a shaping event in British history. But how many British school